We are over 1 million cases now. And I was talking with a friend who came by the house earlier today, and he was like, yeah, everybody in my house had it. We just took the home test, and everybody had it. So we have 1 million confirmed cases right now. Well, how many more cases are there from people who are just like, yeah, I don't feel that well, I'm just going to stay home, I'm taking a home test, and they aren't actually reported in the official numbers? Joe Biden said that he was going to shut down. I'm not going to shut down COVID. I'm going to shut down the economy. That was basically his entire 2020 presidential campaign.
He's not going to shut down the economy. He's going to shut down COVID.
Yes. Did I flip it? Yeah. Well, he's managed to shut down none of COVID, and now we're dealing with the threat of potential shutdowns. And Buck, you and I were texting about this last night. Toronto, and I know we have a lot of Canadian listeners out there. Toronto, the Ontario province, has basically shut down just like it's March of 2020 all over again. Are you nervous now in New York City that New York, L.A., Chicago, some of these cities that have followed the lead of cities like Toronto, are you nervous that shutdowns are coming?
Yeah, limited shutdowns, I think, are going to hit a number of cities across the country. You're going to see this with the school system here already is under the kind of pressure that has led to some schools to just declare they don't have staff to be open. What I think is interesting is, okay, well, how much of this is really just because of overwhelmed staffs because of caseload? There is some data to suggest, and remember, this is after we had the citywide mandate, COVID vaccine mandate for employees, Clay. Right now you have in New York, and remember, when we're talking to New York, I know we have a big New York audience, but for folks around the rest of the country, what happens here is always replicated elsewhere, right? New York tends to be the place that goes first, and then it's L.A. and San Fran and Chicago and Atlanta or, you know, wherever, right? It goes
Washington,
all across.
D.C., Philly.
Washington, D.C., not as much Atlanta, but D.C., Philly. Here's what we got. The NYPD has about 5,000 of its 35,000 uniformed officers out sick as of yesterday. Almost 2,000 of those cops had COVID, 3,000 experiencing flu-like symptoms. FDNY, which is the fire department for New York, says 30% of its 4,200 EMS staff and 18% of its 11,000 firefighters out sick. So what you have is two things simultaneously, Clay. You have such a high caseload and such a concern among the Fauciites about how we're going to stop this. You have these two factors. So it's not just, are we going to shut down to stop cases? It's there are so many cases that you may go into de facto shutdowns or something close to it of things like the school system. We'll see what happens with restaurants. What an amazing success the vaccine mandate program was here.
Can you imagine how many people would be missing work if they hadn't gotten their vaccines and hadn't been mandated to receive them? Now, this is where I wanted to go. A guy named David Leonhardt. I don't want to really tee off on him, although it is ridiculous. He works at the New York Times, and he wrote a piece this morning, which is being widely circulated in liberal circles, and I know this because several of my friends who are left-wingers, I've got a lot of liberal friends, they texted me and they said, man, the New York Times is finally saying, they listen to our show, and by the way, I think as the definition of what is liberal has just gone so far left-wing, we have tons of people who would otherwise consider themselves, right now listening to us, who would otherwise consider themselves to be Democrats that are just searching for sanity, and it's one reason why I think our audience has been growing so much, because the left has gone so far left. They've left this massive, huge void of normalcy, reasonable people that we're trying to appeal to in the middle part of their country. But this guy in the New York Times this morning wrote, American children are starting 2022 in crisis. Welcome to the party, pal, in the words of immortal words of your boy.
Die Hard, of course.
Yes.
Bruce Willis.
I have long been aware. I know you're great at all 1980s movies.
Action movies. We might have to bring back Action Movie Quote Friday at some point, but continue.
He says at the open, I've long been aware the pandemic was upending children's lives, but until I spent time pulling together data and reading reports, I didn't understand just how alarming the situation had become. This is better. I just think this is amazing. Again, he wrote an entire piece, and the headline is "No Way to Grow Up." For the past 2 years, Americans have accepted more harm to children in exchange for less harm to adults. And again, that's really defining harm broadly in terms of less harm for adults. But Buck, he acts like this data hasn't been readily apparent for the last 2 years, and that you and I and all of the people on Team Sanity haven't been pulling our hair out trying to share all this data.